But as the situation changes, we have to have awareness of, is this the right use of my tools and my gifts? And, or is there a gap showing up? And so I keep coming back to, how are you leaning into that practice yourself? There are tools, there are books, there are assessments, there are 360s, there's coaching, there's therapy, there's all of the pieces, but it is about creating connections within your team environment, because work's not a solo sport. Like, we're in business together. Businesses exist for like purposes that are related to societies and communities and all of the reasons why we have businesses. They're offering products and services that are needed for some reason or another, right? So we're not doing this by ourselves.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Ponto. Each week I bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week I'm excited to connect with Jill McCauley. Jill is the COO of Behavioral Essentials, where she helps leaders uncover the behavioral insights that drive innovation, resilience, and lasting change. With expertise in strategic planning, leadership development, and organizational consulting, she has spent over 15 years working with a wide range of organizations, including zoos and aquariums, family businesses, and large-scale corporations. A firm believer that transformation isn't just about ideas, but about awareness, Jill empowers leaders to push past resistance, challenge the status quo, and create environments where innovation thrives. She holds both a bachelor's and master's degrees in psychology from Loyola University, Maryland, and is an adjunct professor in nonprofit governance and leadership. She brings a dynamic energy to operational excellence, inspiring clients to embrace planning as a powerful tool for impact and sustainability. Outside of work, Jill enjoys time with her family and is a competitive horseback rider. Congrats on empowering leaders to push past resistance, challenge the status quo, and create environments where innovation thrives. And welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thanks, Karl. So much. Honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on to talk about what I think is a huge gap between when leaders are trying to effectively lead and influence people on their teams and getting the results they want, is because they're struggling to connect with others because they're not really connected with themselves. They don't really understand how they're showing up, how they're being perceived by others, and who they really are themselves. So how do you help people bridge that gap and be more aware of the way they're being perceived by others? Because it's one of the big communication gaps that anyone who's worked in marketing can tell you, is that it's one thing to say something how you intend it, but it's another way of how people actually receive it. So how do you help people understand how they're being received by their people around them?
We fundamentally believe that awareness, and that's really self-awareness, is the catalyst for all. So it starts with really a study of who are you? And when we think about that, self-awareness is how well do you understand yourself, and then how well do you understand how you're perceived by others. And we push people to look at that journey on both how they identify their behavior, and then it goes deeper. It goes into awareness of your intellect, your emotional capacity, awareness of your personality, and at the deepest level, kind of awareness of your motives. And that work is not done in a vacuum, because to your point, perception is not always reality. And we think we might understand ourselves fully, but really all of a sudden people are doing things around us because we don't see the downstream impact of our behavior and our self. So going back to that concept, it starts with awareness, and it starts with a practice of awareness.
And when it comes to leadership roles, what are some of the examples of you've seen where not being aware of this has caused problems, and what is the result when people actually address those issues and see the impact from changing their awareness and behaviors?
You probably saw me just smirk right there. I think each of us can think of a boss, a leader, where you're like, if they could only just understand what they're doing to us. So go back to those days where you're a 20-something, a young professional in your 30s, your mid-level manager, and you're doing things because your boss is just missing. And you're like, oh, if they could only just see what they're causing me to do right now. It's very easy to go back into your career and think about that downstream impact. And then you think about the fact that you had a meeting about how to navigate your boss. Like there would be a bunch of you being like, okay, if I do this and you do this, we can get around the boss this way. That is called lack of awareness. And it's just, yes, we all learned a lot from it, like in those journeys of being a kind of emerging professionals, mid-level managers, and all of that trajectory. But it's also like we could have been that much more productive if we weren't having a meeting about a meeting because we couldn't say something to the person in the meeting. That's pretty much the standard way to think about it, is how many times do you have a meeting about someone because you're working around that person.
Yeah, and I imagine when that person you're trying to work around is the leader, that's a huge red flag for everyone, that there's going to be some operational challenges for the business and just performance challenges, and there's a huge bottleneck there. So what do you see is the approach to resolve these issues and free up those bottlenecks?
One is when I'll go to the extreme that there is your CEO has tons of blind spots, is not willing to own any of their own actions, and not really going to sit and look in the mirror. It's a really tough situation if you're that person reporting up to them. You can't fire your own CEO. What you can do is you can decide, are they open and willing to listen to your feedback as a direct report or a collaborator? Is their environment, and or like you have to find a new job, unfortunately, sometimes. But when you have people on a team that you are influencing, so you're looking at your own hiring, your own development of those that report under you, it's making sure there's a culture of awareness where you do put on the table, who are we? And how does that impact others? And we process that. And so stepping away from just, okay, we got this to do today, that to do today, here's our list, this is what we got to do. It's like, how are we working as a team and creating time and space to reflect on that? It's, as a leader, it's our job to make sure that we're looking in the mirror. And it starts with us. Whatever level of leadership you are at, and leadership is seen, as you know, in many different ways. From the 22-year-old fresh out of college, there's a version of leadership, to the very senior CEO, business owner, chairman leadership. And it's our responsibility. So what are you doing to look at yourself and reflect upon your behaviors? That's where it starts. And then by bringing that to the forward to your team, it's also about creating the check and balance, because blind spots, the whole concept of blind spots, there's things that we can't see about ourselves, and we all have them. So you drive in your car, you have a rear view mirror and 2 side mirrors for a reason. There are things that are very hard to see without the help of reflection. And that reflection comes from not only, you can use great tools and time and space of meditation, journaling, just simply taking time to step away and say, what was my contribution to that meeting and how accurately did I see it? But it's also inviting those to say, here's how I perceived myself during that meeting. Was that an accurate perception? And we have tools to use that, but it really comes down to a culture of awareness where you're talking about how are you showing up and how is that being perceived?
Yeah, I can see how having that culture, that environment where it is safe for people to ask those questions and get open, honest feedback from people is really valuable. I can also see how it'd be that initial transition from an environment where that's not the case. It can take some work and some effort and someone stepping up and being vulnerable and taking that first lean into the discomfort there, so to speak. But it does have a huge impact on the overall performance for the business and for the team, because there's just so much of like I said, those blind spots where even though you have like the three mirrors, the middle and the two sides, you have to check your blind spot. There's still blind spots, even with all the reflectors up, you can't see everywhere all at once. And so having people around you that you can trust to give you that honest feedback that, hey, after the meeting, you kind of were X, Y, and Z, or like is giving you that course correction in real time instead of waiting for like kind of the standard like yearly reviews, which don't really give much help when it comes to how to actually improve performance. I can see that environment being really valuable, but also hard. It can be tricky to transition to. Is there any suggestions you have for how to start making that transition if there isn't one already existing in an organization?
Doing as much as possible, first and foremost, on yourself. It starts with yourself. And so the journey of self-awareness is not always fun. It's not always easy. And you're never done, because we're designed to figure out kind of default ways of operating. Like, I know what my strengths are. I'm going to lean in on my strengths. But as the situation changes, we have to have awareness of, is this the right use of my tools and my gifts? Or is there a gap showing up? And so I keep coming back to, how are you leaning into that practice yourself? There are tools, there are books, there are assessments, there are 360s, there's coaching, there's therapy, there's all of the pieces, but it is about creating connections within your team environment, because work's not a solo sport. Like, we're in business together. Businesses exist for like purposes that are related to societies and communities and all of the reasons why we have businesses. They're offering products and services that are needed for some reason or another, right? So we're not doing this by ourselves. So working in finding time and space and advocating as much as possible. How can we step away from just the busyness of doing work to actually talking about who we are together, and how I identify, how I behave, what is my personality, what is my intimate kind of emotional capacity, what motivates me, and how do those around me show up, and where do we compare and contrast on that, and what do we learn from that comparing and contrast, and how does that also relate to where we're going as a team and as an organization? Like, that's a really multifaceted, complex piece. It just goes, okay, we don't have any of that today. Where do I start? It always goes back to just starting with yourself and committing to that practice yourself, and then systematically finding your teams. And sometimes that team doesn't mean the person that reports to the same manager as you, or it might mean someone else in the organization that is doing that journey and you value them as a confidant, a colleague, and working on, this is how I perceived myself. What did you hear about what I did? And leaning on that dialogue together, because the more you find others that kind of help you create that psychological safety to have that discussion, that can spread and will spread. The other big piece is, if you have the opportunity to hire and promote people, don't forget about self-awareness as one of the criteria in which you're evaluating. Confidence doesn't always equate to self-awareness. And so you have people who might be gifted at their skill or trade or experience, and you want all of that. But if they're not doing the work on reflecting on themselves, and they're not leaning into an environment of feedback and dialogue about themselves, you're just going to perpetuate someone with a lot of blind spots going up further in the ladder, therefore causing downstream pain and suffering for others.
Yeah, I think that definitely is what's been happened a lot with a lot of the ways companies are hiring and promoting people, is a lot on like the skills and what looks good on paper or what interviews well, but not necessarily on that self-awareness or that communication side of things. And there's so much of the friction between people on teams that leads to poor performance or kind of quiet quitting, or people leaving outright, is because of the lack of self-awareness and the lack of the alignment between the personal side of things, not the skill set side of things. I think everyone, like a lot of teams full of competent people when it comes to the job description, but not competent when it comes to the communication and self-awareness and the kind of quote unquote soft skills that are really required to, I guess, lubricate the business machine and the people involved to keep them like from bouncing off each other and fracturing everything, because they haven't been really prioritized by companies or hired for. And so they're often the things that you can't really teach on site. When someone's in the door, it's harder to teach them those skills versus teaching them how to use a piece of software or like a certain skill set. So they have all these people that are technically brilliant, but not great with the self-awareness or the communication or the listening or these things that allow them to work well with others. And then you have these company cultures that are toxic, and people end up not performing as well because there's not that psychological safety, and the whole business suffers and all the people involved suffer. And it's a lot like what a lot of companies are dealing with right now. And so it seems like it's taking the foot off the gas from the got to get everything done quicker and go to address these issues. It's definitely worth taking that pit stop to optimize the team alignment and the communication and the self-awareness and get rid of these blind spots. You can actually accelerate in a way that's not going to have your engine falling apart halfway down the stretch,
100%. Conflict is natural, right? There's an inherent blessing in some conflict, right? Pushing each other into the growth stages, in healthy discussion of pros and cons of a situation. That's one type of conflict. But conflict where you are just two personalities battling, there is usually something very much missing in that kind of greater understanding. And we can go into the kind of philosophical mindset that all conflict is inner conflict. So what is it in me that I am putting blame on you or the situation? And why am I having that response? What assumptions am I making? And what am I protecting in those? So it all comes back to, like, when we're in a state of conflict, understanding what is my part of that, versus being like, Karl, you are the reason I am not doing this right now. That's not going to help any of us, right? But it's why am I contracted? Why am I getting frustrated? What is going on in me? And without that process, we can't resolve conflict, right? Then I'm just going to avoid you because I don't like Karl. I'm just going to avoid him because I don't want to do the work on kind of owning my side of that equation. So now I'm going to create workarounds and I'm going to avoid these types of meetings. And it's just loss of money in that. And anytime we have team members, colleagues, people, employees doing workarounds because they don't want to engage with certain people because certain people are causing them pain, conflict, suffering, whatever it is, it's just all loss of dollars on the bottom line. Because we're going to spend time talking about Karl. We're going to spend time working around Karl. We're going to spend time complaining about Karl. We're going to spend time talking about what we could have done if Karl wasn't there. We could have just spent time doing our jobs.
Yeah, and I think it's indicative of a larger societal issue where just people aren't able to work through the just human to human conflict and problems because they're not willing to look at what they need to improve on their own end of things with themselves. And it leads to kind of general gestures to world state. And so I think, it's one of those things where the problems on the business side are an indicative of the kind of problems with just the human side of things right now, where people need to get more in connection with themselves and take a break and better analyze and assess who they are and how they're showing up, and actually talk to the people around them and get that honest feedback about how they can improve themselves and show up better. And I think not only will that help business teams be more successful and businesses be more successful, but it also will help just communities and groups be more successful, because it's not something that is only a problem in specific industries. It's basically, if you're a company that employs people, which pretty much all companies are employing people, you're going to have these sort of conflicts rise up, or issues, if you're not having people aware of how they're showing up or how they're being perceived by others. So thank you so much for connecting with me today, Jill. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection Podcast, please like, leave a review, and subscribe. If you want to learn more about myself or Jill, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.